The winter of 1943 pressed hard against every living soul on the Eastern Front, freezing breath and hope together. Private Samuel Harker, barely 20, marched through the snow-crusted forest with his unit, hearing only the crunch of boots and distant artillery echoing like angry thunder. The ground trembled with each explosion, reminding them that survival existed moment by moment. Samuel clutched his rifle, feeling its cold metal bite into his gloves, wondering if the war would ever loosen its grip. Rumors had spread among soldiers about an incoming counteroffensive, one so violent it could sweep entire battalions away. Commanders whispered in tents while soldiers stared into campfires, searching for courage in the dancing sparks. Samuel watched the smoke twist upward like lost souls rising from the battlefield, carrying stories of men who would never return home. He felt the fear but buried it, knowing that fear could paralyze faster than enemy fire roaring across the horizon. By dawn, the sky had turned a bruised purple, and scouts reported enemy movement approaching rapidly through the valley. The unit scrambled into defensive positions, stacking sandbags, checking ammunition, and steadying trembling hands. Samuel positioned himself behind a half-collapsed stone wall, its cracks filled with frost and bullet scars from previous clashes. The air grew eerily silent just before the storm of violence prepared to descend upon them. When the first shells hit, the world shattered into noise and splinters of earth. Samuel felt the shockwave punch into his chest, knocking the breath from him. Men screamed orders, but the explosions drowned every syllable, swallowing voices like a merciless beast. The ground erupted beside Samuel, spraying ice and dirt across his helmet as he returned fire blindly into the chaos. The battle had begun, and there was no turning back. Across the valley, enemy soldiers surged forward like a dark tide, their silhouettes flickering in the muzzle flashes. Samuel steadied his aim, squeezing the trigger again and again, his heartbeat sinking with the staccato bursts of gunfire. He saw comrades falling beside him yet forced himself to continue firing, each shot a desperate plea for survival. Smoke thickened the air until shapes became ghosts drifting in the blizzard of destruction. Hours dragged like years as Samuel's unit struggled to hold the line. The wounded cried for medics, their voices cracking through the deafening clashes. Samuel crawled to a fallen friend, Corporal Evans, whose uniform was stained crimson, eyes glassy with fading strength. Samuel pressed his glove against Evans's wound, whispering encouragement he barely believed himself. The war's cruelty had never felt so raw, so unrelenting. Reinforcements arrived briefly, lifting morale as fresh troops pushed back the advancing enemy. But victory proved fleeting when heavy artillery rained down mercilessly. Trees snapped apart, trenches collapsed, and men were thrown like ragdolls by blasts that tore the frozen earth open. Samuel ducked beneath the shattered wall, gripping his rifle like a lifeline, hoping it would shield him from the rage swirling outside. Nightfall coated the battlefield with a grim shroud, but the fighting did not stop. Tracers streaked across the darkness like angry comets as both sides exchanged relentless fire. Samuel's vision blurred from exhaustion, yet he stayed alert, knowing one moment of distraction could end everything. He wiped soot from his face, feeling the sting where hot debris had singed his skin earlier. In the brief pauses between gunfire, Samuel heard the soft crunch of footsteps. He raised his weapon just as a figure stumbled into the dim light, an enemy soldier barely older than him, wounded, trembling, terrified. Their eyes locked for a single heartbeat filled with confusion, fear, and shared exhaustion. Samuel hesitated, realizing the boy was unarmed and bleeding heavily. Instead of firing, Samuel motioned for him to kneel, keeping his rifle trained just in case. The boy collapsed into the snow, clutching his stomach as blood seeped through his uniform. Samuel shouted for a medic, though he knew their own supplies were running dangerously low. War had stripped everyone of innocence, leaving only humanity's faint and fragile remnants. Gunfire resumed suddenly, forcing Samuel to drag both himself and the enemy boy behind the broken wall. Bullets peppered the stones, showering them with gravel as the night raged on mercilessly. Samuel tried to stop the boy's bleeding, pressing fabric into the wound while whispering words neither understood linguistically but felt emotionally. In that moment, the battlefield felt strangely quiet around them. As dawn approached, frost covered Samuel's helmet and lashes, turning him into a sculpture of exhaustion. His unit had lost nearly half its men, and command ordered them to withdraw to higher ground. Samuel lifted the wounded enemy onto a makeshift sled crafted from debris, determined not to leave him. His comrades exchanged puzzled glances but offered no objection. The retreat was brutal, with enemy fire chasing them across the snow-covered ridges. Samuel pulled the sled through drifts that clung to his legs like iron chains. Every step burned with fatigue, but he refused to let go of the rope. The wounded boy moaned softly, caught between life and silence, reminding Samuel of the thin line separating enemies from victims. When they reached a safer position, medics rushed to treat the wounded, including the boy Samuel had saved. Some soldiers questioned the decision, but Samuel argued that compassion did not vanish simply because uniforms differed. His commander, weary and grief-stricken, eventually nodded in approval. War had already claimed too many souls, mercy was a rare victory worth embracing. Throughout the morning, fresh units rotated in, preparing for another clash. Samuel sat beside a smoldering barrel, warming his numb hands and reflecting on the nightmare they had survived. Snowflakes drifted gently now, strangely peaceful after such brutality. He wondered how many more days like this the world could endure before it collapsed entirely. Later, Samuel visited the medical tent, where the wounded enemy lay unconscious but stable. The medic explained that Samuel's quick action had saved the boy's life. Hearing this, Samuel felt a mixture of relief and sorrow, knowing countless others had not been so lucky. The tent smelled of antiseptic and blood, a haunting reminder of war's dual nature, destroyer and healer. Outside, officers spread maps across crates, discussing another counterattack. Samuel listened quietly, feeling a weight forming in his chest. He had seen too many plans crumble beneath fire and ash, too many promises lost to the unpredictable cruelty of battle. The war machine continued to grind forward, fueled by sacrifice and fear. Night returned, and with it, the low rumble of engines. The enemy was preparing another assault, and everyone braced for chaos. Samuel checked his gear, tightened his boots, and steadied his trembling hands. The sky flashed as artillery lit the horizon once more, signaling another violent chapter about to unfold. When the assault came, it surged like an avalanche. Samuel fired from his trench, shouting warnings as enemy troops advanced through the smoke. Explosions tore the air, and fire washed over the snow, turning the white surface into a landscape of molten scars. He moved instinctively, guided by survival rather than thought. Suddenly, a blast hurled Samuel across the trench, his ears ringing violently. Darkness swallowed him briefly before he regained consciousness. Pain lanced through his shoulder, but he forced himself upright, gripping his rifle despite the agony. Around him, the battle roared without mercy. Through the haze, Samuel spotted a familiar face, the enemy boy he had saved, limping toward the treeline under guard. Their eyes met again, this time filled with recognition rather than fear. The boy raised his hand weakly, a silent gesture of gratitude amidst the chaos tearing the world apart. Moments later, another barrage shook the ground, and Samuel stumbled into cover. He felt the weight of survival pressing against him, urging him to keep moving. Smoke stung his lungs, each breath scraping like sandpaper. He pushed forward, determined to reach his unit and hold the line. Hours blurred together as the fighting intensified. The once quiet valley had transformed into a furnace of iron and fire, swallowing every trace of peace. Samuel fought not for glory, but simply to keep those beside him alive. He felt time stretch into a cruel loop that refused to break. By midnight, reinforcements broke through, pushing the enemy back and finally ending the relentless assault. Samuel collapsed near a barricade, too exhausted to stand. Snowflakes landed on his face, melting instantly from the heat of his skin. He closed his eyes, replaying every moment of the last 2 days in painful clarity. Medics worked tirelessly, gathering the wounded and fallen. Samuel helped carry bodies, both friend and foe, realizing how war made all men equal under its shadow. He wondered how many families would receive heartbreaking letters in the coming days, and how many dreams had ended in the snow. When dawn arrived, the battlefield lay silent at last. Smoke curled gently from the scorched earth, drifting upward like weary spirits seeking rest. Samuel walked through the debris, feeling both relief and sorrow tug at him. Victory meant little when the cost stained the ground beneath his boots. Later, the commander commended Samuel for his bravery, especially for saving the enemy soldier. Samuel accepted the praise silently, knowing he had acted not out of heroism but humanity. Even in war's darkest corners, compassion could still flicker like a stubborn flame refusing to die. As the unit prepared to move to a safer region, Samuel looked back at the valley one last time. The snow had begun to fall again, covering the scars of battle as if trying to heal the wounds of the earth itself. He felt a strange comfort in the quiet, hoping that someday the world would learn from such suffering. Before departure, Samuel visited the medical tent once more. The enemy boy was awake now, pale but breathing steadily. Their eyes met, and though no words were spoken, a bond formed, fragile yet meaningful, born from the ashes of conflict. Samuel nodded gently before turning to leave. As the convoy rolled forward, Samuel gazed at the horizon, where sunlight broke through the heavy clouds. The light felt like a promise, faint but hopeful, whispering that peace might someday rise from the ruins. The war was far from over, but Samuel carried with him a new understanding, that in the heart of destruction, the smallest act of humanity could echo louder than the roar of any battlefield.